What's going on, guys, and welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where every single week I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original programming that I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the return of Photo Shoot on the network that aired after all this past week, featuring the one and only Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall. Great episode here, clocks in at around 26 minutes in length. Obviously feels like 5 minutes. Scott Hall has stories for days. So this was a real good episode. We kick things off with our first picture, the NWO Photo Shoot, right around the time that they first formed. I think it was just Hall, Nash, Hogan, and I think Big Show's in there too, because he didn't name drop Big Show here. And he talks about how it was in the thick of the Monday Night War. The underdog was winning, that being WCW. And then all those guys in the picture learned what they knew in working for WWE, except for Big Show, because obviously he started out in WCW before coming on over to WWE. And he called Show too kind, saying that if he liked you, he would put his hand under your butt when doing the chokeslam, like when he lifts people up in the air for the chokeslam. He would kind of like gently put them down by putting his hand on their backside, butt, back, whatever. If he didn't, he would only use one hand and really put some oomph on it and make it hurt on the way down. The next picture we see is of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash crashing commentary with Eric Bischoff and Larry Zbyszko. He recalls wrestling Larry Zbyszko when he first started out in his career, and Larry Zbyszko giving him a break and helping him out. So when they first worked with each other in WCW, when the show went to commercial, when Nitro went to commercial, Scott Hall went up to the commentary booth, would mess with Zbyszko and get the crowd kind of chanting for Zbyszko and get him over. And it worked, because Zbyszko got 2 pay-per-views out of it. Like, he wrestled 2 pay-per-view matches. So that's not really something that works nowadays with the commentators. You don't really get the commentators over. But Zbyszko was beloved back then. He was very well liked. And he said it feels good to pay back people who helped you for no real reason. We get another picture of the NWO backstage, this time with many more members, including Scott Norton, fucking fake Sting, who Scott Hall was like, we even got fake Sting over. Like, even he was getting over with the audience because anyone associated with the NWO was fucking over like Rover. He was so popular. They were also popular, just having the NWO initials next to your name. We see another picture of him with Eric Bischoff, and he's like stumbling on the ringside area, It's because they were doing a drunk storyline with Scott Hall by that point, which I had no idea about. I honestly do not remember this at all. I was not obviously watching at that point, but I have no recollection of this angle whatsoever. Hall was struggling in his real life by this point, so Bischoff wanted to turn it into a storyline by pretending he was drunk on air. Then he even feigned puking at one point, which is pretty fucking gross. And they did that in WWE. They've done that a million times. They did it once with Titus O'Neil on like the Black Friday Thanksgiving edition of SmackDown many, many years ago, like 5 years ago. Fucking disgusting. So WCW is not the only company to pull this shit. Let me just mention that right now. We see another picture of Hall and Nash, this time back in 1991, as the Diamond Stud and Oz, respectively. Now, to be fair, the Diamond Stud, that being Scott Hall, wasn't that much different than what Razor Ramon would end up becoming a year or two later. Oz, on the other hand, was a far cry from what obviously Kevin Nash Diesel would be doing in the years that followed in WWE. He had awful gear, an old school cape. He got a fucking mask from the dollar store for this gimmick. And Scott Hall said that Nash made twice as much as him at that point in his career, which is pretty funny. We see pictures and clips of the Razor Ramon vignettes, and the first time in a long time that vignettes had preceded someone's debut. Scott Hall talks about Vince being even more hands-on back then than he is now, which is hard to believe, which is not really all that hard to believe at all, because Vince is not that hands-on with many things nowadays. Maybe not hands-on, but more like involved, whatever. Anyway, so we talked about how Vince McMahon had directed the vignettes himself. He flew out to wherever they were, California, I forgot where it was, Florida, I don't remember. And Vince directed the vignettes himself. We see clips of that. And they didn't have any permits to film. They just kind of went out there and did their thing, which they probably should not have done, but they got away with it. We see a picture of Scott Hall from his debut as Razor Ramon. So he had this gimmick. It wasn't really a gimmick at first, but he told the person that was like collecting his entrance attire, his chains and whatever, he said, just hold on to these chains, make sure you don't lose them, hold on to them, make sure they don't get stolen or whatever. Like, legit speaking. And then someone said, speak up next time so the camera can hear you. And he's like, oh, okay. Because they wanted to use that as part of the character. Like, it makes him seem like a dickhead when he tells someone, hey, don't lose my chains. That was an awful Razor Ramon accent. I won't even attempt it anymore. I apologize. He was like, don't lose my chains, otherwise you're going to have a problem with me. If something happens to those chains, something's going to happen to you. So that became part of his character, and he always took tips from other people in the company, which is why it was such a great environment, he says. We get a picture of him with Shawn Michaels saying that they crossed paths previously before WWE. In the AWA, they built a relationship together and being on the road so much together. And at one point, seeing Michaels more than he saw his own wife. That's how much they were on the road together in the mid-90s. We get another picture of Razor Ramon with Mr. Perfect. And he said that Mr. Perfect always took pictures on his tippy toes because I guess he didn't like the fact that he was short. I don't know. But he said he noticed how Mr. Perfect always swatted away the gum that he was chewing. You know how like he did that? He would chew the gum, and then before and after his matches, he would spit it out and then swat it into the either ringside area or the crowd or whatever. So Scott Hall took notice of that and developed his own toothpick stick. That's a tongue twister. Toothpick stick, where he would chew on the toothpick and then throw it at his opponent. And that developed out of what Mr. Perfect did with his own gum. So he took some pointers from other people in the company, specifically the one and only Mr. Perfect. We see a picture of Scott Hall wrestling, or rather Razor Ramon, whatever, wrestling 1-2-3 Kid on that infamous episode of Raw back in 1993, saying that the whole thing with him losing to Sean Waltman, later known as X-Pac, was cool for his character to come up short to such a loser, and he liked being a part of it. Didn't know then that they would become such good friends, that they would still be good friends even 25 years later, which they are. We see a picture of Razor Ramon with Walter Payton at SummerSlam. I believe is a member of the Chicago Bears, or was a member of the Chicago Bears at that point. I guess they had done something at SummerSlam. I forgot what year it was, but Hall had to fly out to Chicago to film vignettes with him. And Peyton just loved being a part of it, and they traded shirts. He said, okay, if you give me a Razor Ramon shirt, or Scott Hall said, if you give me one of your Walter Payton jerseys, I'll give you one of my Razor Ramon shirts. And he said he was really cool to work with. We see a picture of the WrestleMania 10 match. That was the culmination of the feud with Shawn Michaels over the Intercontinental Championship, their famous ladder match, saying that it went a little longer than expected, which is a bit of an understatement because that match went so long. I think there was a 10-man tag team match that was supposed to take place on that show and couldn't because of the match going so long. So Scott Hall and Michaels got some heat for that. But obviously one of the greatest matches of all time, so it was for the right reasons. I'm sure that 10-man tag team match was not missed, with the exception of the people involved, obviously. So a bit of a cool story here. I think I've heard this before. You probably already know this story. But Hall was told after the match by Earl Hebner, who was told by Shawn Michaels to go to the top of the ladder and just seize the moment. I mean, after the match was over, he already won the match. And he wanted to, just embrace the crowd and the atmosphere and the audience and just the pop. So Shawn Michaels was like, go have your moment, go be a star, go bask in the glory by being at the top of the ladder and just taking it all in. And it ended up making for a great visual, and he said that was one of the loudest pops he had ever received in his career after that point, which I can believe. The next picture we see is of the rematch they had for the Intercontinental Championship a year and a half later at SummerSlam 1995. And because it was a new belt they were working with, there was a botch in the match towards the end where Michaels jumped off the ladder. He was supposed to grab the belt in midair and then bring it to the ground with him. Because the belt was brand new, it wasn't broken in yet, he grabbed the belt, but it didn't come off. So he just crashed down to the ground. And he had to go up to the top of the ladder and do it all over again. So kind of a fucked up flat finish because of the botch. And it was because of the new belt. You could obviously tell Michaels was really, really pissed because he's like throwing the ladders around like, what the fuck? I'm sure he said that. You don't hear it. But he climbs up again, retrieves the championship because of the botch. So I forgot about that, but yeah, it's a pretty bad way to end what was an otherwise great match. So we have another picture here of Scott Hall shooting the new opening to Raw on the rooftop back in the mid-90s. He said there was long nights on that roof, but he never complained because those people that were filming with the cameras and the production crew, whatever, were always there when they got there, and they were there when they left too. So they were there always longer than the talent themselves. So he knew to never complain because of that, because they were always there longer than the wrestlers. We get a picture of him with Mr. Fuji, calling him the Master Ribber, and that the 1-2-3 Kid and Mr. Perfect were his disciples, and that no one could ever get one over on Mr. Fuji. We see a picture of Diamond Dallas Page, who served as his manager way back when in WCW, saying that he sometimes came across as too happy in his promos, but they were always the perfect pairing. We get a picture of fake Razor Ramon, who had debuted in WWE, obviously, after the real Razor Ramon left for WCW, saying that he never met the guy, but it was because of that guy, not really him specifically, but WWE doing the fucking dumb gimmick of bringing in a fake Razor, that it was because of him that he got a raise in WCW, thinking that they were going to leave. That Razor and Kevin Nash, were going to leave WCW back for WWE. So they got a raise without doing anything at all. We see another picture of Scott Hall taking a Stone Cold Stunner at WrestleMania 18. He asked people when he first came back to the company, knowing that he was going to work with Stone Cold, I don't really know how to take a stunner. Like, how do you take it? And he was told to take it on his knees, which he did at first. And he's like, that's not going to work for me. It's going to hurt my knees. I got to think of something else. So he just stood standing up, taking the stunner, and then just leapt up into this like crazy-ass jump. And it looked absolutely fucking ridiculous. Like when Rock used to take it at WrestleMania 19, like flipping all over the place. It looks absolutely stupid. But it is memorable. So, and he said that in taking a bigger bump, it would make the fans pop louder, which is true. So it made for a more memorable moment, even though the match itself was really nothing special. We see a picture of the Clique at WrestleMania, not WrestleMania, but the Hall of Fame in 2014, the first time in a long time they had all been together on stage, just in one place, at the same time, and that Scott Hall had the pleasure of wrestling all of them at one point or another. Obviously Shawn Michaels, obviously 1-2-3 Kid, obviously Kevin Nash, but never really Triple H, though he did say this final match in WWE at MSG, the place of the curtain call back in 1996, was against Triple H. So he at least had that experience. And he says that in the picture that everyone else is smiling, and he's not really, just because he's in a trance, kind of taking it all in. And he gets a little bit emotional looking at the picture. And I thought that was in 2011. Maybe Scott Hall wasn't there in 2011. I know they did a mini Clique reunion on stage in 2011. I'm almost positive they did when Shawn Michaels was inducted. But I guess it was Scott Hall's induction in 2014 where they officially reunited. I don't know who would not have been there in 2010 or 2011. Must have been, I know Kevin Nash was there. Just must have been Scott Hall who wasn't there on stage with them. So yeah, must have been in 2014 when they first reunited for the first time in full on TV or something. I'm not sure. The next picture we see is of the WrestleMania 31 return of Scott Hall, or Razor Ramon, whatever, when Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash all returned as the NWO during the Triple H Sting match, saying that they didn't know the hallway was so long when they heard their music hit. So they took their time. They thought it was only one curtain, but they found out there was at least 2 or 3 curtains in total. So it took them a little longer to get out on the stage. So they got 2 pops, and it worked out better than anything they could have scripted out. And Hogan had to be spotlighted, which is why he went after X-Pac, and X-Pac took that bump for him so Hogan could be spotlighted right in the middle. Typical Hogan. And the final picture we see is of the Raw 25 return of Razor Ramon. And he said that it didn't seem like 25 years being back on that show. I was at that show, not at the Manhattan Center portion, but at the Barclays Center. Great show overall. He said he loved the reception from the fans, and he says, it feels really cool to be at this point in my career. Also saying, these are the highlights of my life that I'll never forget. So yeah, love seeing Razor Ramon at Raw 25, at WrestleMania 33, and love seeing him pop up every now and again in WWE and on TV. So with that being said, guys, that wraps up my review of WWE Photo Shoot featuring Scott Hall. Very enjoyable stuff. Be sure to check it out on the WWE Network. Clocks in at around 26 minutes, but as I said at the start of the show, feels like 5. So be sure to check it out at your leisure. And we'll have another new Network and Chill up on either Friday or Saturday with me reviewing the Season 8, Episode 2 of Total Divas. So until then, guys, be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Have a great rest of your week, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.